All right, what's the best thing that you saw on social media this week?
For me, I would say it is a tie between a group of tiger cubs adopted by a golden retriever and the pastor from the inauguration invoking the Lord Almighty to launch a scammy meme coin immediately after the event.
What was the name of the meme coin?
Oh, just $ Lorenzo, his name.
Incredible.
Mine is probably that there is a fish in an aquarium in Japan who stopped eating when they had to shut down the aquarium for a little bit and the visitors couldn't come. And then they put up fake pictures of people in the window, staff and visitors, and then the fish started eating again.
Oh, it reminds me of Drew.
I will do it, but only for the attention. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you the conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about. I'm Drew Goins, author of the Today's Opinions newsletter.
And I'm Molly Roberts, a columnist here at the Post. Today, we're talking about the current status of social media in American culture.
A bunch of people fled Twitter. Yeah, I said it, Twitter, after Elon Musk took over. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg at Meta announced that Facebook and Instagram are done with fact-checking, and the future of TikTok is as shaky as an iPhone held by a dancing zillennial.
My gosh, how can I match that? The digital town square seems to have split into camps that mimic the country's political divides. Most platforms specialize in serving you up only the content you agree with anyway, plus a ton of AI-generated junk. So it's a good time to talk about what we're really using social media for in 2025. Is it still even serving us? We're joined today by Philip Bump. Hi, Philip.
Well, hello.
So before we get into the bigger stuff, I feel it's important to, disclose and just kind of set the table. What are our relationships personally with social media? Where are we coming from? Molly, why don't you start?
My sense is this is true right now for a lot of people in my generation. I'm very solidly a millennial who came of age around the same time that social media did. But personally, I've started to move away from the wide worlds of Twitter and even Instagram and toward smaller, closer online communities. So Discord servers are a good example. Discord is the platform popular among video gamers, famous last year for the leak of some classified documents by an Air Force employee who also, of course, was a video gamer. And the group text maybe counts as social media? You tell me. I think you mentioned one that you really love that is like a super niche community, Drew.
Oh, are we talking about Dive with Buddy? Yeah, yes. This is one of those very tiny social media sites that is for scuba divers because never dive alone. I might have just saved a life. You're always supposed to dive with a buddy, and this pairs you up with them. But people also use it as a social media site, and like 75% of the posts are just look at this beautiful fish, which is really nice corner of the internet.
Mine is far more toxic than either of yours.
We didn't get into my toxicity.
I use it to track what's in the news, and so I had been an early convert to Twitter. I was on Twitter back in 2007, and it's just become an absolute garbage dump in part because I write often about politics, and this is what happens. I use Blue Sky now, which is really coming of age as a news and conversational source. Other than that, I generally avoid meta products, but it's broadly unhealthy, I guess is the short answer to your question.
Would you say that the majority of your time spent on social media is in a professional context, like you're on it for work, otherwise you might be off it, or are you on it for personal reasons too?
I've got little kids, and so there is some Instagramming where I put pictures of the kids up for my family. But of course, I had to lock that down because people were leaving rude comments about politics on pictures of my kids before I did so. So yeah, I mean, it's not entirely, but yeah, generally speaking, it is integrated into my professional life, and as such, carries with it all the connotations of having to do it for work, which makes it even less enjoyable.
Yeah, right.
I was thinking about those kid photos and the trend in the past, I don't know exactly how many years, of people posting photos of their kids, but they put a giant emoji face on top of the kid's face. And it's for privacy. But it does feel a little weird given when I look back at the old days of Facebook, the whole point was to post your kids and you could actually see the kids' faces, and people wanted to see your kids' faces, and you wouldn't have thought that anybody would be there saying something nasty about your kid or maybe stalking you using your kid. And it is sort of a sense of how far we have fallen.
Yeah. I heard that Philip is actually posting just cardboard cutouts of his kids so that all the fish following him will not go hungry.
I won't eat unless I see them, so.
I am off of Twitter very recently. I am increasingly on Instagram, also for like quasi-professional reasons, where I'm publicizing my ongoing appearances on the game show Jeopardy.
Couldn't resist a plug. I see.
Tune in tonight. I feel like I'm deepening my relationship in some places and lessening them in others, which leads me to my next question for you two, which is, do you think we are past the age of peak social media, or are we headed to it, or are we just at this plateau where we're going to stay, substituting one thing for another, but never ultimately changing our relationship with it writ large?
I would say that I think social media is sort of following the pattern that the broader web did, which is that there was this emergent period in which there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of sort of ad hoc creation happening on the site that eventually got funneled into more professionalized systems. But fundamentally, what happened is people realized it could be used for power and money. And as soon as it became obvious the extent to which it could be used for power and money, then it became less useful for its prior purposes and less hospitable to people generally, and people's creativity and novelty and the things that made them great. And so I, as a member of Gen X and who grew up with the emerging internet back in the 1990s and early 2000s, and subsequently did the same with social media, I've seen this happen twice, and enjoyed both of those periods of sort of novelty and weirdness and fun and creativity and innovation that then got stamped out by the boot of capitalism. And such is the way of the world.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think we're certainly past peak social media, if peak means social media at its best. I just think that even if you look back to, say, 2016, another time where everything seemed kind of scary and uncertain, people were on these platforms feeling like speaking there gave them more power. These were ways to magnify our voices. We still held on to a little bit of that dream from the Arab Spring, and it's just become super clear now that that is not true. The trouble isn't just that these platforms are hoovering up our data. The trouble is that we're not really in control of what or who gets heard. We know who is. We're seeing them saying that explicitly on X, not Twitter anymore. Literally, Elon Musk tweets are what's appearing. I mean, there is no disguising who's in charge. You go through your feed and there's so little valuable information. There are so few thoughts, even from your friends. There are just AI-generated t-shirts that say, like in the Keep Calm or Carry On font, there are just ads that read, and this is a real example, mix cola with Vaseline. Mix cola with Vaseline and just watch. And you're like, is this a threat? Or
Did you try it?
I'm terrified. I'm not going to try it. I really do think Eden is over. I don't know that means we're past peak social media in terms of how much we use these platforms, but the quality is certainly degraded.
I will say that it's important to point out 2016 as an inflection point, right? Because in 2016, and particularly tied to the election, we saw this big emergence of both misinformation and abuse that occurred at that same time. And the reaction to it was, hey, we got to stamp this out, right? Twitter, Facebook, the other social media companies took active steps in the years that followed to try and reduce those things. And part of what we've seen, first with Elon Musk buying Twitter and creating this new company, X, which is fundamentally different in a lot of ways. And so I think it's actually useful that he renamed it, because X is different than Twitter. But first there, and then with Meta, we've seen this backlash of pulling away from those responses, in part because it's perceived as being in tune with the political moment, which I think is a misread, but I feel like we're going to get into.
You mentioned Blue Sky, which you said is coming into its own as a source of news, as a social media site. That feels like the maybe one exception in social media sites that is not suffering from this rightward lurch. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a couple of things. The first is that the very nature of Blue Sky, the way it's constructed. There's a company, Blue Sky, that creates this app, but it can tie into other social media feeds and mechanisms, which makes it so that Blue Sky itself has less power over what's happening. But it also means that it allows for more tools. Like, one of the things that made Twitter great back in the day was it was very easy to create bots that did positive things, beneficial bots as opposed to the toxic ones.
Sure.
That you could do filters and apply tools to what was happening in your feed in a way that that made it more useful to you. Blue Sky is very, very hospitable to that, which is beneficial. I will say that it's not the only bastion of positivity, if you will, in the social media space. Like Reddit, for example, I think has proven itself to be pretty robustly friendly, and this in the same way that Blue Sky is sort of distributed in its management. Reddit is distributed in its management. Each Reddit subreddit has a moderator that's able to shape and guide where it goes, or moderators in most cases. And I think that by having it not be a corporate entity, instilling a top-down set of how things are going to be, and therefore having those corporate entities be subject to pressure from, say, incoming presidents or election results, means that they can be more resilient and more responsive to what the user base wants.
So yeah, I really like that more hopeful gloss on it. I think the kind of jargon people in the industry would use is Web 2 versus Web 3, although that brings a bunch of blockchain stuff in that maybe we don't want in. But the idea is it centralized corporate control versus these more federated systems? And so perhaps I shouldn't have been so despairing. Perhaps we reached the peak for the centralized model, but there's something better possibly ahead. I'm with you 100%. Reddit is a great example. I spend a lot of time on Knife Reddit, and they talk about chef's knives. It's not violent. I spend some time on Goodyear Welt Reddit, which is about like leather shoes. This all sounds very manly of me. I'm revealing new facets of my personality, but that's what the internet's for, right? It's all about discovery.
Molly traveled back to 2011, and she's on ironic mustache subreddits. So as far as these sites where there are titans in charge at the top who have the ability to just wrench them in unsavory directions, with Meta and the end of fact checking and disbanding its DI programs, and obviously everything going on with Elon Musk. We have so many people leaving those platforms. Is there any sense in staying to avoid siloization? Does it matter that people are leaving? Is this, polarizing us further? I get that it's a collective action problem. Like, who wants to stay on Twitter, or on X rather? Philip, you make a great point about differentiating. What am I going to do as one person? But is there a downside to people leaving in droves?
Yeah, I mean, your question reminds me a little bit of the question that people asked in 2016, and I suppose are asking again now about whether federal employees, for example, should conscientiously object to the Trump administration from within their workplaces. But I feel when it comes to social media, sticking around is not going to make things better. It's not really the case that if only we expose the worst people on social media to our supposedly more enlightened viewpoints, we're going to change their minds and heal the country's wounds. On the other hand, I don't think leaving is going to do any good on a systemic level. I really think it is just about doing what's best for each of us individually, our own emotional health.
I read just yesterday a great newsletter from the writer Anne Helen Peterson on reassessing our relationship with social media, which I think a lot of people are doing now. And the way she framed it is, I haven't come to value it less. Instead, it's become less valuable. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about quitting social media. But for now, I need like 50 or 60 minutes to check my Instagram. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I am here with Molly Roberts and Philip Bump to talk about the current state of social media. So before we talk about getting off and quitting, let's talk about the positives. What do you think social media can be at its best? What do you like about it?
Yeah, this is a pretty basic answer and obvious answer, but I think it's still true, which is that it does allow you to connect with people you'd otherwise never speak with. What I think is perhaps less obvious is the way that even large social media communities can really feel like communities. Everyone who's ever spent any time on Twitter, for example, knows who Bean Dad is. They know what it means to be corn-cobbed. I've always been fascinated by the way that chronically online people speak a similar language. It's indecipherable to normies. The word normie would be probably part of that language. And these people more or less wrote that language together. Just sociologically, that's a pretty cool phenomenon.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it's the extent to which a lot of that conversation comes from both drill and 4chan, I think is probably not ideal, but that's neither here nor there. The central example of social media elevating news is, when there was the guy in Pakistan who's like, hey, there's helicopters at Abbottabad, and that's unusual in the middle of the night, and it was, sweeping in to get Osama bin Laden. Like, that can still happen. It can still happen that someone observes something unusual and elevates it to the world's attention in a really useful way. The challenge now, of course, is that it's harder to sort of sift your way through all the muck and nonsense and toxicity in order to find those things. But, it is still the case those things can be elevated, and that's of, literally historic significance and didn't exist prior to 20 years ago.
You are clearly more civically minded than I am, Philip, while I sift through my degen forums, but to each his own.
Okay. More and more people are talking about just getting rid of social media, like totally disconnecting, quitting. Where are you guys on that? Is that something you've thought about? Is that something you've tried? I'm going to ask Molly first because I know she did a really interesting project recently where she spent, I don't know how many days it was, how many weeks, with a dumb phone and tried to disconnect as much as possible. So tell us about that, Molly.
I've spoken about it before on this very podcast, but an abridged version was basically that I spent about a month with a dumb phone, Nokia flip phone. And what I found at the end of it was that I'd kind of lost the reflex to be picking my phone up, checking something, and that was genuinely freeing.
Right.
So the question of quitting, probably not quitting. I think social media still is an insight into our national mood or the vibes in more niche segments of society. I think everything Philip said is totally true. There are things about the world that you might not ever find out. There's news that you might not find out without social media. It's valuable. But engage less? Absolutely. I already do engage less. I post less. Check it less? That would be nice. I should probably do the dumb phone project again to get rid of that reflex again. It is very much back.
Yeah, it's interesting that the reflex went away for you. How long was the project?
It's just like a month.
Because toward the end of December over the holidays, I downloaded one of those dime a dozen apps where you have to like take deep breaths before you access Instagram. The one that I set up was you had to literally do push-ups on a motion capture camera. So just like the idea being like something to really, really disrupt you if you want to look at these particular apps. And so I blocked Instagram. I blocked, other various like Reddit, even other social media. And I found myself spending so much time in my email app, or I would pull up, a cooking app because I was just like, I need my eyes on something.
Or you'd watch back the videos of yourself doing push-ups.
Yeah, exactly. I did not find that reflex go away. I found that I needed to find something to substitute social media. I mean, I think there's this like promised land on the other side where eventually it does go away and, you get up and do the dishes or you go write, that thing that you've been meaning to write for yourself for forever and ever. But like right now, after just 3 weeks in December, I felt like I was still stuck in the valley of the shadow of death. Philip, do you feel like ever trying to get off?
Yeah, I mean, I constantly feel like trying to get off, but I just it's not that I like physically can or I'm dependent on. It's just I need to know what's going on in the world. Like we work for a newspaper,
right?
it's sort of hard to be like, well, who cares what's happening out there? I mean, it's not a luxury that I can afford.
I mean, that speaks to a certain point, right? That a lot of people need to keep tabs on what's going on in the world, right. And I'll push back for a second, and I mean, you're in a particular bin of people as a journalist who needs to be
so to speak.
We're all in a particular bin of people, but a lot of the people out there like can wait to get it in a reputable newspaper like the Washington Post. I don't think everybody needs to be getting those minute to minute updates, no matter how much we've become accustomed to them.
Yeah, let me out of the bin.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. But of course, the flip side of that is that the social media companies have done a very good job of figuring out how to make it so that people do feel like they need to do that, right? And so, this goes to your entire point, which is that there's this countervailing pressure. It's not as though people woke up one day and were like, I wonder what's happening everywhere in the world right now, right? Like that was in the same way that no one had a concept of a million, back in the caveman days because they had no use for it. We have no use for that level of information. But the social media companies figured out that both by presenting that information to people and getting them mad about 80% of it, they can make money. And here we are.
That gets to the question of whether we'd be better off without social media. And I do think it feels a little, you mentioned cavemen, Philip. I think it feels a little primordialist to say the country would be a better, less divided place if we never had this. You can say that about almost any technology. Certainly, you can say it about cable TV. And maybe it's right that there'd be less strife if we all lived in the places where we grew up, that we wouldn't think of boredom the same way, that we wouldn't be disturbed by the absence of a stimulus right in front of us all the time that we don't even really have to do anything active with to be entertained. We might read more books, we might touch more grass, but there'd also be less opportunity for any of us to become something other than what we were when we were born, and there'd be less opportunity to see the rest of the world. So,
Here. Before we go, what is the funniest social media app you've seen out there?
I mean, mine would be, there was an app that was popular for like 3 months in like 2011 called Yo. And you had contacts on Yo, and you would go into Yo and you would hit your contact's name and they would get a little alert on their phone that said Yo, and that was it. And it was just like, it was fun just because it's so incredibly dumb.
Amazing. Mine is similarly a single utterance, which is Greta Van Sustren's Sorry app, which was just for sending apologies to people, and other users could rate the sincerity of those apologies.
And I have to say that mine was the official Jeremy Renner app that was devoted exclusively to the movie star Jeremy Renner. There was a problem with it, though, which was that anybody who posted on it would send a push notification to other users that made it seem as if they were speaking in the voice of Jeremy Renner. And some people, as often do on the internet, took advantage of that and sent some suspect stuff in the voice of Jeremy Renner. So sadly, the app is no longer with us.
All right. With that, we have got to wrap this up. Thank you both for joining me for this episode of Impromptu.
Of course.
Thanks so much, Drew.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Demir Marusik, Chris Sulentrop and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Tell us what you're thinking about social media these days. Email impromptu@washpost.com with your thoughts. And if you're enjoying the show, please be sure to leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Or just send us a yo.